Okay, if you'll turn in your Bibles to Genesis, look at chapter 27 of Genesis. Can I get a chair, Riker? Chair, please. Thank you. I wasn't going to start until Genesis 29, but God laid on my heart to give you a little backstory here, what's going on with the man in the story. I'm not here to talk about the man, but to talk about a woman. That's what Brother Mike asked me to speak on, a woman, and so that's what we're doing. But let me give you a little backstory, what's going on with Jacob. If you look in Genesis 27, we see that Jacob has stolen a blessing from his brother Esau. And the chapter heading in 28 gives us a little outline there that Jacob is sent away. His mama says, Rebecca says, you better run. Esau's going to kill you. Get out of here. And then we see, this is where Jacob's ladder, the story we hear about Jacob's ladder, and I didn't even piece all this together until I started looking at this. I'm like, let's go back and cover this, because I like this. Start at chapter 28, verse 10 of Genesis. Then Jacob departed from Beersheba and went toward Haran. He came to a certain place and spent the night there, because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of the place and put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he had a dream. And behold, a ladder was set on the earth with its top reaching to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give it to you and to your descendants. Your descendants will also be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and in you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. I'm going to stop there. So that kind of gives you some background of what's going on with Jacob. You know, he was running out of fear, and then God meets him in his place where he is, and that's where we're going to pick up. The saga begins, and you have notes here, and I'll kind of pause when it's time to fill in a blank, and this will go quicker than it looks on paper, 10 points, but Rachel's journey, the saga begins. As I read Rachel's story starting in Genesis 29, I find myself broken for her. Much of Rachel's life is wrought with tragedy, ill treatment, and barrenness. From her scheming dad, Laban, to her fertile sister, Leah, who gets her husband, Jacob, life for Rachel doesn't seem fair, and history believes that her mom is deceased at this point in her life. The timeline of Rachel's life is extremely lonely. In Genesis 29, verses 10 and 11, we see love at first sight. Rachel's at a well with her father's sheep to get water for them. She is a shepherdess. So she probably had a tan, looking real good, natural tan. And she had to work out to get those, sheep in, so she's looking good. Jacob had traveled into the area, and he was sent by his mother Rebekah to flee from the wrath of Esau, because he stole his birthright. Well, Rachel is noticed by Jacob at the water well, and he was smitten with her. He kisses her, and he knows immediately that she is the one for him. It's a sweet beginning, but it quickly goes sour. A custom of that day, you see, was that the oldest daughter has to marry first. Big deal. Not should or could or might. They will marry first. Well, Rachel's the youngest, and Leah's the oldest, and she's not married yet. So she knows them probably. She's like, oh, I found me a man. But their father Laban made a deal with Jacob to work for 7 years to earn Rachel, he says. Then on the wedding day, a heavy veil is provided for Leah so you can't see her identity. So Leah, instead of Rachel, is taken into Jacob on his wedding night, in a dark room, I'm sure. And what do you think? Was Rachel part of her dad's deception? Or did Rachel and Leah both understand what had to happen? And Jacob was just left in the cold. Either way, the wedding night he believes he will spend with Rachel, he instead spends with Is everybody paying attention? Leah. So we see the tricky first point here, or second point, wedding night. Is this punishment for Jacob? I had to think. For the bad deed he had done back in his hometown? That's some punishment. Get the wrong woman. Well, God still uses stories that are less than perfect, and you're going to see how God uses this story. He can still use brokenness and barrenness, and this begins the brokenness and barrenness in Rachel's life. The second point is from broken and barren to humble. We see Leah being fruitful in this marriage with Jacob. They have 4 boys, and this must have been extremely stressful for Rachel. She watched her sister marry the man that she was betrothed to. And I wonder if Rachel knew that God was in control, and did she even consider waiting patiently for her time to become a mother? Rachel was known for her beauty. And Jacob immediately fell in love with her when he saw her at the well. Just because the world sees beauty doesn't mean it doesn't cover up a broken heart. And I was thinking on this morning, and there are other things that we might cover up our broken hearts with: a new car, piece of jewelry, a tattoo. There are many things in our life that we might try to distract others from the pain we're feeling. I might put a little extra makeup on if I've been crying. Done that. Did that this week. Many in the world shun women, though, even today, who can't have children or think that God isn't blessing them. But maybe God had other plans for them than just having a child from their womb. Contrary to the beliefs in society back then, it is not a sign of weakness or of being cursed. Think of Riker and I. If I had not been barren, you may not have ever met our adopted children. When we fully understand that God uses barrenness and brokenness just as He does strengths and accomplishments, then we will begin to breathe easier as He rolls out the red carpet of our story. In 1 Peter 5:6, let's turn there. It's in the back of the Bible near Revelation. 1st, 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, June, Revelation. Yes, 1 Peter, not 2nd, but 1 Peter 5:6. Okay. Here Peter is talking to young men and giving them some advice. And in verse 6, he says, "Therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that He may exalt you at the proper time." And verse 7 says, "Casting all your anxiety on Him, because He cares for you." I pray that when I'm troubled and when things are unfair in my life, that I can humble myself and wait on God's timing. You see, good for me spiritually may mean, and this is not popular belief in some churches, but good for me spiritually may mean me going through brokenness. It may mean for me to have good in my spiritual life, may mean one of barrenness. We will see that. And good in my life is when God gets the glory. You see, God used both of these women to bring about the 12 leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel. And a good thing to remember, your last point under broken and barren and humble, God uses ordinary, everyday situations to lead our path. He even used a simple trip to a well. Point 3, give your wounds to God. Rachel and Leah's father Laban had given Leah to Jacob out of trickery. I wonder how Rachel responded within herself to this situation that she found herself in. Did she feel deceived by her father, or was just part of society's lot for her life? The oldest must be married first. we respond when someone deceives us? How do we respond when someone takes something that we feel is rightfully ours? Rachel had to be preparing for her wedding day. I was watching a wedding show, The Perfect Wedding, on Hallmark last night. They wanted everything perfect. Well, maybe she wanted that. So your next point there, do we continue to trust God when He doesn't come through as we feel He should? I find it difficult to believe, though, that Jacob wouldn't have realized until morning that he was with the wrong woman. Some believe maybe these were twins. That helps us to understand it a little bit more. Maybe they're just a little bit different in their physical attributes, but it's something to ponder as we read the story of the two girls and of Jacob. Regardless of why Leah went along with it, the hurt must have oozed from Rachel. From Leah getting her husband first and then having children, the bitterness and envy probably was billowing from Rachel's heart. She felt wounded. And your last point here, we must learn to give our wounds to God. Number 4, the blame game. In Genesis 30, verse 1, we see Rachel realizing she's not having any children. It's almost as if she has a breaking point. By this time, Leah has borne 4 boys for Jacob, and Rachel doesn't wait on God, but she offers her maidservant to Jacob. And we hit on this a little later. It is estimated that Rachel is barren for, imagine this, 14 to 25 years. I thought waiting 5 or 10 years was bad. 14 to 25 years before she conceives. Rachel watched Leah have those 4 boys from her husband. They were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. When Rachel sees that she has no children, who she blame, Riker? She blames Jacob. This causes issues between Rachel and Jacob, obviously, and it seems they have a heated conversation. And Jacob says, "Am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" You see, it's so easy. Couples here, people that have been couples, people that are couples. Isn't it easy to lash out at the person, that's the next blank, person closest to us when we feel loss or mistreatment? Why is it? Did Rachel feel rejected by God? Did she trust God's plan for her life? Women in this day were a severe embarrassment if they couldn't bear children. Her very worth was tied to her bearing children. I might have struggled with wondering if God had forgotten me too if I'd lived in that day. Next point, we must, what do you think it is? Trust God instead of blaming others. In Genesis 30, verses 22 through 24, we read that God restores her barrenness. And we need to remember this. Our lives are in His hands. God opens and closes wombs as He chooses. This speaks to so many areas of our life. God opens doors and He closes them. He creates barrenness and He creates fruitfulness. Point 5, waiting on God's timing. Just like us, Rachel doesn't wait for God to bring what is good in His time. Rachel gives her maidservant to Jacob. Her name is Bilhah. Bilhah conceives and has Dan. And then in Genesis 30, verse 6, she prays, "God has freed me. He has heeded my plea, and He has given me a son." Bilhah and Jacob conceive again and have a son named Naphtali. The prayer that Rachel prays after this birth is interesting. Genesis 30, verse 8 reads, "With great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed." Maybe Rachel was in a little bit of competition with Leah, you think? Does Rachel fear she will lose favor with Jacob if she's barren? Well, Obviously, these ladies are warring for something. Leah then realizes that she has stopped bearing children. She appears barren and gives her maid to Jacob. Leah's handmaid is Zilpah, and Zilpah and Jacob have a child named Gad. Then Zilpah and Jacob have another son named Asher. Then Leah says, I am happy, for the women call me happy. Do you think she has the right attitude about having children with that statement? If that's the way she said it. I don't know. Maybe not. You might not call it envy, but something is going on between these two sisters. Maybe each are trying to win Jacob's affections, and maybe the societal thought of their worth being tied to childbirth is just that extreme. Again, neither of their hearts are in the right place, right? Their choices both to marry Jacob was wrong. God's command is that marriage is between a man and a woman, and their choice to give their maidservants to Jacob was sinning. Did Jacob jump the gun on choosing a wife? Was he just so enamored by Rachel's beauty? Was Leah actually to be his wife, but he gets so smitten with Rachel's beauty? Maybe Rachel was Jacob's choice, but Leah was God's choice? After all, Leah is his first wife, and Judah comes from this line between Jacob and Leah. Christ would come from the line of Judah. That's Leah's offspring. Well, a key point to remember is that nothing in this story or our story, here's your next blank, surprises God. The next blank, the 12 tribes of Israel come from both of these relationships. You see, he uses everything. Point 6, God orders our steps. It is good to know that even our bad choices of life, he can still use every one of these for his good. Next blank, so many of us manipulate circumstances to hurry along God's design for our lives, while all along sinning to accomplish the plan, and all the while not taking into account that there will be consequences. Do we really think that God is going to bless all our trickery, deception, and manipulation? It's so easy for us today, and behind my computer, and laying on my bed studying, for us to pick apart Rachel and Leah and Jacob. But instead, today, let's ask ourselves some tough questions. Where am I being deceptive? Where am I being manipulative? And your blank here. Where am I not waiting on his timing? Just because God's design isn't playing out how we believe it should, it is no reason to step up and make choices on our own. Point 7, God restores our barrenness in his time. Again, in Genesis 30, verse 22, God remembered Rachel. He listens to her, and he did open her womb. Why did God wait? Why was she not fertile from the get-go? You'll see in a minute when you see the timeline. Some answers we will never know, but Rachel's dry and barren place was children. What is your dry, and your blank there, barren place? What is your dry and barren place? Next, what areas in your life have you prayed and feel that God isn't answering? And finally, do we trust God with our dry and barren places? Point 8 is no other gods before him. Without letting Laban know, Jacob leaves in the middle of the night with his wives and his children, which is Laban's daughters and grandchildren, just leaves. And Rachel sneaks away with the foreign god statues. I had some insight more on this morning. It's not in my notes, but maybe she wanted her dad to not trust the foreign gods anymore. And so she was taking away that temptation. That's not what I originally thought, but maybe she had attachment to the gods. Maybe she thought they had some fertile, enhancing properties. Either way, she is, or maybe she was getting back at her father because she didn't get Jacob first. Either way, Laban comes hunting for them and the gods. These gods seem to be significant to him. Are they to Rachel? We don't know. Rachel has hidden them. Once Laban catches up to Jacob and his family, he starts searching through all their possessions. They're camped out here, and Rachel makes up some story where she doesn't have to be searched and found as a thief. She says she can't oblige to their search because she is on her period. The Levitical system says that a woman on her period was unclean, so to say the least. Laban did not continue his search. Later in their travel, we read in Genesis 35 that Jacob reminds them to make an altar to who? The one God. And to put away all the foreign gods that are among them. Some of us have, here's your blank, gods we are holding on to. What are they? Next, what do we find ourselves having trouble parting with? Rachel ends up burying the foreign gods under a terebinth tree when Jacob asks her. So the next point is, do we also lie to cover up our sin? And lastly, holding on to other gods can show our dependence on them. Point 9, God's will is to die for. In Genesis 35:16, we learn that Rachel dies during the birth of Benjamin, who is her second and last child of the 12 tribes we're going to see in a minute. Sometimes the very thing that God is birthing in our lives will cost us our very breath. Each of us long for something. Maybe it's not a child, but we have waited and waited and waited for God to answer our prayers, to start the birth process of change, perhaps. Is the change happening and it's scary? What is He birthing in your life? That's the next blank. What's He birthing in your life? Next one, are you willing to pay the ultimate price? And yes, my 10th point, God's favor continues through our children. We see in this story a beautiful picture of Jesus Christ in both Leah and Rachel's line. Rachel had only 2 sons from her womb, Joseph and Benjamin. Church, tell me which one of these sons would save his family from a severe famine in Egypt. Remember, he was sold by his brothers, and then later he was put in a place of authority to save their lives. What was his name? Joseph, that's right. Leah's son, Judah, the next blank, is the generational line that produces Jesus Christ, and he is the divine one who died to save us all. We may not have abundance, but God uses what He gives us. Who are you raising in your family? And who is learning under your wing? Some last thoughts to think of, and these will be on the screen one at a time. As we saw Rachel finding herself in a predicament at the beginning of her marriage, did she trust God in every detail of this? Here's some thoughts for you and me. Do I trust God with the details, or do I run ahead? Number 2, how do I process moments of waiting? Number 3, what situation have I had or am I presently going through where someone has really misused me, mistreated me, or flat out manipulated me? I can think of some. Number Number 4, would I have a complete breakdown, or am I able to trust that God has it all under complete control? And number 5, do I realize that God is still in control of all of my days, my minutes? He knows the situation, and He will fight for me. And as you see in the picture on the screen, God holds all seasons in His hands. Nothing touches our hand that hasn't first touched His hand. And is there one more screen up there? Okay. Let me tell you the birth order really quick. I want you to picture this. There's 13 numbers here. Each one of them has a child's name. I want you to see the part of fruitfulness and barrenness in this story. 1, Leah has Reuben from her womb. 2, Leah has Simeon. 3, Leah has Levi. 4, Leah has Judah, the line of Christ. Rachel is barren. She uses her servant Bilhah to have Dan, then her servant Bilhah to have Naphtali, however you say that. 7, Leah's servant. She's barren, right in the middle here. See this time of barrenness? God's still using them to make great leaders. Do you see how He uses barrenness? Leah has Gad and Asher, and then Leah has a time of fruitfulness with Jacob. She has Issachar, and she has Zebulun. She has a daughter named Dinah. Read her story. It's a soap opera in itself. It's not happy times. Poor girl. And she's not a leader of the tribe of Israel. But then we get to number 12 and 13. When you're looking at those tribes, we have Rachel has Joseph, who saves his brothers who have been mean to him. He comes back and shows a beautiful picture of grace. They threw him in a pit. You know, they went back and told his dad, Isaac, that he's dead. And what's he do? He turns around and loves them and gives them food in their time of famine. And then baby Benjamin comes along, your 12th child, 13th child, but 12th tribe of Israel. Isn't that neat to see the time of fruitfulness, barrenness, and then fruitfulness again through Rachel? So Rachel was patient, but she did die giving birth to that last child. Last thing I want to say is I was making this cover sheet, and it kind of sums up Rachel's journey. From broken to barren. The broken part is where she didn't get her husband. Barren, where she can't have children with her husband when she does get to share her husband. Then she's humbled. God humbles her. Then she's healed. And then she becomes a legacy of salvation for all mankind. Why? If Rachel hadn't have been at the well, she hadn't been beautiful, hadn't caught Jacob's eye, Jacob wouldn't have gone back and found Leah, we wouldn't have had the line of Judah. Jesus comes from Judah. Isn't that neat, the picture of how Jesus comes to save us all through a little shepherdess at a well getting some water for her sheep, and all mankind gets to reap the blessings.
Yes. It crossed my mind how many children were born to Leah when she was his wife and Rachel wasn't. I don't know if there's anything that says that.
For those on Facebook, the question was, how many children did Leah have before Rachel comes to be married to Jacob? I don't know. Maybe that's in there and I didn't see it. Maybe it's in history and I don't know.
I don't think it is, but I just thought, what a hard thing to watch.
Yes. Had to be. And in the years 14 to 24, I came up with some in history say 14, some say 24, so I just put it as a range. That's a long time to wait. I mean, people are at fertility doctors within 2-3 years sometimes. Imagine 14 to, of course, you know, we can't have children later in life like they could then, but 14 to 24 years. I picked on her for not being very patient, but she was pretty patient. She waited for 24 years.